Good morning, everybody. So there's nothing else you get out of today. I want to impress upon you this particular phrase. Focus on the work, not on the worker. So what does that mean? What even is the work? So today, we're going to be talking about focus on flow, taking lean principles and putting them into action. My name is Mike Clement. You can find me on Twitter at MD-Clement. You can also email me or check on my blog, which hasn't been updated very much in the last few years, but I will put up the slides from this presentation there within the next week or so. So focus on flow. What does that mean? So in business generally, but in software development, there's this idea of going from concept, having an idea, to cash, meaning that we have somehow taken that concept and turned it into value that other people are willing to pay for. In some cases, cash may not be the actual value that we're delivering. It may be something else, but we may be exchanging for other types of value, but cash is a good proxy for a lot of those different things. So we want to take concept and we want to turn it into cash. So as I had said before, right, there's this idea of focus on the work, not on the worker. So in lean, when we're talking about flow here, the work, we refer to that as a flow unit. That is something that is flowing through our system that we're trying to pay attention to. This flow unit is what gives us value. So we're going to go through and think about a couple things that we might do here, right? Let's use it. We're going to use an example. So this example is a kitchen. So if we have a kitchen, what is the thing that we're focusing on? What is the flow unit? What is the work as opposed to the workers? Well, there are a lot of things we have in a kitchen. The measuring spoons, right, and measuring cups. Those are things that are in a kitchen. They're tools that are available to be used in a kitchen, but they aren't the thing that we're focused on, as things are, they're not the thing that we're most worried about utilizing. They're not the thing that we're most worried about having be, maximally utilized, I guess, or most efficiently utilized. They're things that are important. Another thing is knives, right? We don't look at the knife and make sure that the knife is being used all of the time, or that it is being, again, efficiently utilized. We want to use it effectively, and we want to use it at the appropriate time, but we don't necessarily want to make sure that it's efficiently used. What about a pan, right? We're going to be able to cook things in this pan. But again, this isn't really what we're focused on. Like, the pan itself is still a means to the end. What about the burner, right? Maybe we want to make sure that all the burners are constantly being used. Well, this may be a resource in our system that we want to efficiently utilize, but it's not the thing that we're focused on if we're focused on flow unit. We have a myriad of other different utensils available in our kitchen, but none of these are what we want to focus on. Again, focusing on the work, not on the worker. Now, what about the chefs, right? These are very clearly, they're people that are valuable, and we want to make sure that, they're being used appropriately. But again, they are the worker. They are part of the work. They're part of the workers. We have both people involved as workers, but we also maybe have tools that are involved as workers. And none of these things are the things that we want to be focusing on. We want to be focusing on the work. And in a kitchen, right, the work is the dish, right? As the dish progresses from the beginning until it is completed, that is the thing we want to focus on, making sure that that is efficiently and effectively being worked on. If we're working on a steak, we don't want to leave it in the pan too long. We want to be focused on that. We don't necessarily need the pan to be continuously being used, but we do want to use the pan effectively. Again, focusing on the work, in this case, the dish, but not on the worker. Now, the thing is, in this kitchen example, right, when are we done? Right? Is it when the dish is completed, when it's plated? Well, if this is a professional kitchen, right, in a restaurant, it doesn't really matter until the customer gets their dish on the table. So we're expanding the vision here a little bit, right? Like when it's within the kitchen, maybe all we care about is there's an order that comes in, we get the dish ready, and then it is ready for somebody to go and take to the table. The thing is that just having it plated does not yet deliver value to anybody, really. So maybe it's from the time that the customer orders it, right? Because there is still potentially time that happens from the time you order it till the time that the kitchen starts working on it, till the dish is on the table, right? That's one way to look at a flow unit, right? That dish, that order, that customer order going from when the time the customer orders something till the time that the dish is on the table. That is a reasonable thing to look at in terms of how we want to be effective here. The thing is that oftentimes, usually, we go to restaurants in groups. Maybe not as big as the group displayed here, but we usually go in groups. So really, the thing is that oftentimes servers will not bring out food to a group unless all of the food is ready. They won't bring it out here and there. They'll bring out the whole thing as a complete order. So potentially here, our floating unit, the thing that we're focusing on, might be the whole order, right? The party orders at the beginning, and then when all of their dishes are at the table is when the value has been delivered, right? And again, this is just another way, zooming out a little bit, to think about what it is that we want to focus on as we're thinking about what is flowing through our system. What is that flow unit that we're paying attention to? The thing is that in a restaurant, the most valuable thing a restaurant can have is actually, in a lot of ways, it's real estate, right? It's a table. So perhaps instead, we want to make sure that we can seat a party, and then it's when the party leaves, right? So we want to make sure that they are that the actual party, the people, is the flow unit. We want to make sure that they make it from, they come in, they, potentially expanding to when they come in the door, right? Making sure that they are able to, get seated, and that they can have, they can order, they can get their food, they can pay their bill, and they can, do everything they need to do in order to leave, right? But the thing is that even there, if we want to step back even further, right, we want the table to be bussed and cleaned and ready for the next customer, right? This is called turnover, right? We want to turn over the table as quickly as possible, because then, again, in our restaurant example, this leads to money, right? The faster we can turn over the table, the more orders we can put through, and the more that we can actually, profit. And for companies, right, that is what we're focused on. While we do want to, take care of the well-being of people, a lot of it is in service of making sure that we, again, turn that concept into cash, that we're able to take a, focus on a flow unit and deliver it so that it can turn into profit. And so one of the things that we pay attention to here is this idea of cost of delay. And we'll revisit this in a little bit. But if you think about it, right, if we're not able to turn over those tables as fast, we're not able to seat as many people, fulfill as many orders, and make as much money in a given night. You can think of cost of delay as being variable, right? At the end of the night, when there's nobody waiting, the cost of, for example, the cost of delaying bussing a table goes down because it's not as important. There's nobody waiting. We're probably not gonna turn the table over again. But if we're at like that, hour, to 90 minutes before closing, that's really important to keep it turning over so that we can make sure that we continue to be able to seat people. Okay, so we have this kitchen example. We're able to look at different, potentially different flow units, from an individual meal to a party's order to the party itself, to the table, right? The table turning over, right? And there's different ways that we can focus on different parts of the work, different work, in order to achieve different results. But again, going back to this idea of we're going to focus on the work, not the worker. So that's flow, right? We're trying to flow things through our system. So the other component of my title was lean, right? Lean principles. So what is lean then, right? This is like, it's a term that can refer to anything from, fat content to what we're going to talk about today a little bit. But even in the context of business, lean has been put as a modifier in front of almost everything. It's become very trendy, right? To say, hey, my thing is lean, my thing is lean. And the reason why this is possible is that there's no single generally accepted definition of lean. So that's part of the problem here. What that leads to is this idea of a suitcase word. This is an interesting concept. Basically, certain words kind of take on the meaning that somebody wants to give them in a particular moment because it's convenient for them. And the thing is that really what it ends up being is that the word means, so in this particular case, right, lean tends to mean everything is good and everything good is lean. We've seen this with like the agile movement. We can almost see this happening with DevOps right now. It's like, oh, well, that's a good thing. So now that is part of lean. That's part of agile. That's part of DevOps. That's part of product management. There's all different areas where, again, as it grows in popularity, additional things get incorporated, right? And then everything that is good ends up being part of that. So that being said, I want to kind of constrain what it is we're thinking about when we're thinking about lean. So what is lean? So oftentimes when people think about lean, they are thinking about the Toyota Production System. This is kind of where this idea kind of spawned from in manufacturing, right? We're going to take, there's, they talk about just-in-time, automation, like all these things, and it's probably something you've heard of at least in passing. And a lot of what goes on in the Toyota Production System, right, is almost by definition lean. But, in terms of what we're talking about here, like what else might it be? Lean startup is probably where it became most popular recently as an idea, right? And there's a lot of techniques that are incorporated into lean startup that people use to much effect. But for the thing is that if we look at both Toyota Production System and lean startup, the problem here is that we don't want to define lean as methods. We don't want to define it necessarily methods. We want to use methods because the methods become the goal itself. There's a story. One of the leaders of Toyota was invited to come see a manufacturing plant, and the managers of the plant were so excited to show all the things that they were doing that they had learned from Toyota, and they were like, here's what we're doing. We have an hand-on cord, and we have, we're pulling things just in time and all of these things, and the manager asks, so have we done it? Have we achieved a method? Like, are we lean? And the response was, well, I wasn't here yesterday, right? Meaning that the methods are not as important as what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to improve, right? And if we don't, the method should not be at the end in and of itself, right? Like, becoming lean is not useful, in as much as, or at least specific techniques to become lean aren't necessarily as useful as remembering these principles, such as, and I'm going to repeat again, focus on the work, not on the worker. So so if we zoom out one level, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to do this idea, we're trying to improve our flow efficiency, right? We're focusing all of our time and attention, our resources, on a specific flow unit. So if you go back to our example from the kitchen, right, we might take time and focus on how can we deliver this particular dish or dishes, right, in the kitchen more effectively, more efficiently. How might we deliver and deliver from when the customer orders to when the customer gets it more effectively, which would include more elements, making sure that we can deliver a whole party's order together, not just together, but like together effectively, like so that we haven't, done somebody's and it's cold by the time that the whole party's order gets delivered. Or we can be looking even bigger at, from the time the party walks into the door to the time the party's table is turned over. And again, looking at different flow units, we can make sure that we're applying everybody's time and attention and all of our tools to that flow unit. When we're, another example is here, like running a relay, right? Oftentimes when we watch running, track events like we maybe did at the Olympics this last summer, you're focused on the runner, right? It's super exciting to watch the runners run really fast, and when we have a relay race, there's potentially multiple runners. But again, if we focus on the work, not on the worker, in a relay race, we have a baton. And the baton is actually the thing that we really care about. Even if in a relay race, all of the runners run as much as they're supposed to, if we're being like super efficient, like we could have all the runners run at the same time. But the thing is that what we're trying to do is run that baton around in an effective way, in an efficient way. Again, it's that focusing on the work, in this case, the baton, is what we want to do. So what I'm going to assert today is that when we're talking about lean, we're talking about being flow efficient. Now, what does that actually mean? We can actually quantify it. It can be sometimes messy to actually look at in real life because for various reasons, but we're going to look at an example here. So the basic idea of flow efficiency is we want to look at the value added time and divide that by the total time. We can debate whether or not total time ends up being calendar time or business hours or whatever, but a lot of times, whatever the total time is, we want to take the value added time divided by the total time. So here's an example. So typical software thing, right? Somebody reports a defect. Now we're saying that there's going to be 30 minutes of work time on the defect. Again, we're focusing on the defect as the flow unit. The defect is reported at it takes 30 minutes for the person in support to write up the defect and take the information from the person. That defect now goes into the tracking system. Let's say optimistically, about 4 hours later, a programmer decides that, hey, look, there's a defect. I'm going to pick it up. The programmer works on it takes about 6 hours to resolve the defect. Then the programmer pushes it to staging and then somehow notifies the tester, hey, tester, when you're ready, go ahead and look at this. Probably via a tool, right? Like they might just move it into a ready for testing or something like that. Again, optimistically, let's say 4 hours later, the tester picks it up, they test it. It takes them about 2 hours to run through whatever automated tests, but then also do exploratory testing to assure that it's actually done. Now we still have to deploy it. And so we're going to put it into, again, another queue and wait for ops to do it. And then it'll take about 30 minutes to deploy. Now, a lot of these things you might be like, oh, well, this is a little anachronistic, right? This might be, say, 10 years ago that a scenario like this might happen. Things might happen faster. Some of these things might be better automated. But I've actually been in scenarios, I've heard of people who are working in systems where it still takes multiple hours to deploy, that things go out in batches and things like this. So let's say optimistically that we're able to deploy this one defect at a time, right? So if we take that and we do a little calculation, we take 9 hours and divide it by 12 hours, which is what our wait time is, plus the 9 hours, we end up with about 43% flow efficiency. Is that good, that bad? I don't know. I mean, again, I wasn't there yesterday, so I don't know how it's improved. It could be that the wait times used to be days instead of hours. It could be that, different things, that the wait times had been even longer, that there were even more steps, that there was a designer or somebody else that had to take a look at it before it even came in, right? I don't know what it was before, so I don't know if this is good or not, but 43% all up is actually, from what I've heard, not terribly bad given, getting a defect out. Now, let's take another example. Let's say that we are really focused on defects here, right? That we kind of take the zero bugs approach, and we don't want to allow any defects to linger in our system. So in addition to support, and so instead of support deciding that they're going to write up a defect report, we say in our particular system that we're going to make sure that
you have about 8 minutes, Mike.
Okay. We're going to make sure that the support and the programmer talk, and they're going to talk instead of writing something up. The programmer's still going to take 6 hours. The tester is going to get out of their meeting in about a half an hour. Wait, sorry. I thought I had an hour, not half an hour. So I have till 11:30, right? Just making sure. But in any case, we're going to do the defects. We're going to wait till the tester gets out of the meeting, right? We're going to grab them. We're going to sit outside. We're going to just grab them as soon as the meeting's over. We're going to then discuss it.
Mike, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. We're going to discuss it together. They're going to test it. And then we're going to wait for ops, right? And so instead of just putting it into a queue, we're going to actually, make sure that we sit there and make sure that this gets out as soon as possible, assuming that other people have meetings and things like that, right? And then this amps us up to 90% flow efficiency, right? We've gone from 12 hours of wait time to 1 hour of wait time. Okay, so what if instead of waiting for that meeting to be over, we just interrupted the meeting and said, hey, that we have a fix ready for that defect. Could we get that tested. We have that fix ready. It's been tested and programmed. Let's go ahead and deploy it. Right? Because if we do that, then we're at 100% flow efficiency. And this might, seem trivial, but if we look at it, it might be the difference between, if we're thinking about this work and wait times purely as like work hours, like this might be the difference between 24 to 36 hours, right? 3 work days to 1 potentially work day, or 1 longer work day, or possibly at least within 24 hours, right? And this allows us to be a lot more effective. So again, it's this idea of focus on the work, not on the worker. Now, if we look at those 3 examples, did anybody work faster? No. I specifically put 6 hours for the programmer, 2 hours for the 2 hours for the tester, 30 minutes for the deploy, and 30 minutes for the support. I guess in this case, like the support was talking to the programmer, so you could say that the programmer took an extra half hour of his own time, his or her own time, but nobody worked faster per se. But the key part here is that they were done sooner. And this is where, again, this idea of how do we get from concept to cash? How do we reduce the cost of delay? How do we get things moving and flowing through our system is super important. Again, this is just a little, it's this idea of like, what if we were to actually work together as opposed to, trying to each being used. So again, lean is flow efficiency. Focus on the work, not on the worker. Now, the thing is, you probably heard of a lot of different things with regards to lean, right? Small batch sizes, SWIP lengths, watching queues, all of these things, right? Experimentation is a big part of like lean startup. Bottlenecks, is a big thing in theory of constraints, which is part of the lean kind of body of knowledge. The thing is that all of these are in service of the flow efficiency idea. So that being said, actually skip over this. So the typical way that people approach how they look at work, though, is they look at resource efficiency. And resource efficiency is where we try to make sure that, again, in that kitchen example, that burner is constantly being used, that knife is constantly being used. The thing is, it might be a machine, right? Like in a manufacturing setting, it might be a particular automated processing machine. We want to make sure that's constantly being used. Oftentimes, when we're talking about resource efficiency, we're talking about people, and that the people are constantly being used, that they're not ever sitting idle, that people's hands, like in the case of developers, that their hands are always on the keyboard, that they're never without work to do. And this obsession, if you will, with resource efficiency can be very detrimental. Not that it's not important, not that we want people or tools or whatever to sit idle intentionally, but unfortunately, the pursuit of that can be detrimental. So if we look at flow efficiency versus resource efficiency, we ideally want both, right? Up in that upper right-hand quadrant, right? We want to have that idea. And lean really, although I've been talking about lean focusing on flow efficiency, if we are really getting flow efficient, we will, as a byproduct, start to get resource efficient. But the trouble is that if we focus on resource efficiency, we will not get flow efficiency as a byproduct, right? So we want to be able to see if we can get into this state. The thing is that most people, like I said before, are focused on being an efficient island, right? Each individual worker or each individual tool in a system, like that it's maximally utilized. The thing is that if we focus on utilizing resources efficiently, right, or people, our time and attention, it may increase the amount of work there is to do in a system, right? So if we're trying to make sure that, let's say, for example, a developer is maximally utilized, that they are not going to be involved at all with a user experience design, that is going to cause additional work when the user experience design gets handed off to the developer because they weren't involved with it. They don't understand it. They may do things inappropriately. Additionally, like again, if we try to keep people in their lane, as it were, we may also end up with additional problems in terms of people doing too much. And we'll get into this a little bit more in a little bit, but think about how it is that focusing on resource efficiency might increase the amount of work without any value. The classic example is utilizing the resource of highway pavement, right? Like this looks very well utilized, but it also looks like not much is moving very effectively. It's not flowing, but it's being utilized. A couple weeks ago, it's maybe a month or two ago now, there was, so I live outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and Atlanta's traffic is, it's not, I mean, you guys are DC, so we have similar traffic problems. But a couple weeks ago, this came up on my newsfeed. Apparently, 3 different cars tried to get off the freeway at the same time and ended up nobody getting off, as well as blocking other people being able to get off. So again, maximally utilizing something does not necessarily mean that it's effective or that things are flowing. So now you might think, okay, well, if we're resource efficient, all we have to do is move over and then we can be lean. We'll just take our resource efficient state and apply flow efficiency to it. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, as well as, I mean, part of it is for a variety of reasons and just because math, it is almost impossible, if not impossible, to go from efficient islands to lean. We have to go through the wasteland, through the efficient ocean, and over to lean. Mostly it's because if we're super focused on everybody being maximally efficiently used, then there will be no slack in order to improve the system. So how do we improve the system? So Mary and Tom Poppendieck identified 7 software wastes in their book, Lean Software Development. And these mirror the 7 wastes that are often used in manufacturing. So we're going to go through each of these 7 in order, in sequence, and talk about how we might be able to apply, look at these wastes to be able to improve our practice. So the first one is partially done work. So one of the things is with our particular industry is that we are mostly doing knowledge work. We may be producing code, right? Code is, when we're changing a product, we're updating a product. A lot of times if we're delivering additional features and things like that, but it's largely invisible. And so when work is partially completed, it's sometimes hard to see, as opposed to in a manufacturing context where if there are parts and pieces laying around the warehouse or the assembly floor, it is easy to see those and easy to see where those problems are. So we do not, right, if work is partially completed, if you think about our example earlier, right, the work wasn't complete until it was delivered, until it was deployed. If we were to, that defect, while it was waiting for the tester, while the fix was waiting for the tester, that was partially completed work. That was work that was in process. In retail, it's very easy to see this, right? We have a lot of inventory that's on shelves. None of this is presumably delivering value to anybody yet. Nobody's eating it, nobody's consuming it, nobody's paid for it. Maybe perhaps in the context of the factory, the producer, they've delivered some value. But if it's not moving off the shelves here, then they're not going to get additional orders in the future, which again impedes their flow of value. One of the interesting things is like with books and bookstores is that bookstores can send back books, and then like basically it's almost as if it's on consignment. And so until the book gets actually into the hands of a consumer, it's been purchased, then even the publisher may not have the value that they need. More insidious than stuff sitting on retail shelves is when it's in a warehouse, right? Now, again, this is all very visible, but in our case, when we're dealing with code, it's really partially done, right? Like it's very invisible. But here are some examples of different things that might count as partially done or in-process inventory. What we try to do oftentimes to combat this is use things like WIP limits. We might put WIP limits on our process so that we don't allow things to languish too long, that we focus again on the work, not on the worker. So I could probably do a whole talk on just limiting WIP, but if you stay focused and limit WIP, more catchy than that, limit WIP isn't as fun as saying this, right? So this idea of let's stop starting and start finishing. So instead of letting things just pile up as partially done things, let's make sure that we drive things all the way to completion. My mom is a quilter, and apparently in their particular community, it is not uncommon for people to have multiple, very many projects that are partially completed. They like starting things, but then don't actually like getting them done. My mom has actually given my wife several projects that have been partially completed because my wife does like finishing things. And so, again, the thing is that with quilting, right, if we're saying that the flow unit is the quilt, then it's not flowing very well. The thing is that for a lot of quilters, they don't care. That's not what they're focused on. They're focused on actually just doing it as a hobby. So again, it all depends on what we're trying to focus on, what we're trying to get. This is in the case where we're actually trying to get things done. The second waste is extra features. So feature creep is real. People love to put bells and whistles and GPS devices on tricycles and things like that. The thing is that this is ridiculous, but we do it all the time, right? We want to make sure that there's an economic need for the feature before we develop it. I don't know how to say it more clearly than that. There are multiple different ways that we want to look at it. Cost of delay is one important way to prioritize things. So we're looking at things that actually will deliver value now, as opposed to, or at the very least, reduce, allow us to realize value quickly. So that's the second waste. The third waste is relearning. This is one that's really interesting. We often try to prevent this waste by creating documentation. Now, we don't really create documentation in binders anymore, at least in most places. Most of the time it's on a wiki, which is probably, again, more insidious in that it is less visible than a bunch of binders on a shelf. The thing is that our challenge here is that if we need to rediscover something that we once knew, we often, when we try to prevent that, right, by creating documentation, we're often too verbose, as well as not being rigorous enough, right? So there's that quote that's attributed to multiple people at this point, but the idea of I would have written a shorter letter, but I was in a hurry, right? I didn't have time to write a shorter letter. So if it's important, then be rigorous about it. If it's not important, don't bother, because then it's just going to get in the way of people actually finding what they need. We don't necessarily need to be comprehensive. The other part of relearning is that oftentimes we have people within our organization that have knowledge and we ignore it. This is, use the diverse talents, abilities, knowledge, experience of those that you have within your team, within your organization, within your company. This is even more insidious than losing track of knowledge, right? It's like we have people who know these things that can help, and we just don't know. There's some techniques like doing skills inventory if we're looking for specific skills, but even just making sure that we have a diverse set of people, both in terms of role, in terms of whatever axes make sense for your particular situation. Make sure that you're engaging as many people as you can, as many people make sense to in your development process. One way that I have done this and currently doing this is with mob programming. This is not in a situation where I've worked, but this is idea of working together, making sure that we're, I'm not going to go deep into mob programming necessarily. I have, again, other talks that we could do on that. But this idea that we're going to have multiple people, the whole team of programmers all together and working together on one computer is super powerful in terms of making sure that we're bringing forth those diverse skills. Feedback is important as well with this idea of relearning, right? Like if we can close the feedback loops, then we can find out, we don't have to document things for as long, because they're not as long living, they're not as we can get feedback faster. So again, mob programming really allows us to do this. There are other techniques obviously to do it, but one way to combat the waste of relearning is to make sure we have sufficiently fast feedback loops. Handoffs is one that we talked about a little bit earlier, or I alluded to at least. I'm sure most of you have played the game Telephone at some point. If you haven't, let me I'll quickly describe it. Basically, you have a bunch of people in a line. Somebody at the beginning comes up with some sort of phrase. They will speak that phrase, whisper it to somebody next in line, and that person will then whisper what they heard to the next person, and so on and so forth. And at the end, you find out what the last person heard versus what the first person said. It's it's a goofy game. It kind of illustrates this point of handoffs, right? Every time we have to hand something off, we have this lossiness of our communication, especially, again, we're working in knowledge work. The manufacturing equivalent is motion, right? It's like, or that, things are moving between stations. So we have, that's why the assembly line moves, right? Because that's the flowing, that's the thing we care about. And by automating that, it makes it easier for everybody to be able to put the things into the product that they need to. So again, another example of this, again, another game is Telestrations, if any of you played that. This is where you have a word, and then somebody draws that word, and then somebody writes what they think that is, and then somebody draws it again, and you go back and forth until you end up with probably something that isn't exactly what was originally said. And it's, again, another fun idea. Another way to illustrate this in your work is this idea of, this is like TDD drawing. So somebody, you can see, let me see, you can see back here, this guy has a printout, and he is describing through words, right? They're back to back to this guy here, what to draw. Now, the thing is that this is illustrating that, the most effective thing would be to give this person this exact drawing and say, draw it. But the thing is, usually it's not already drawn. It's something that's in this guy's head and he's describing it. Right. And this is all exacerbating by having excessive silos in our development process. Whether that's between customer support, client success, product management, user experience design, developers, testers, ops, like all of those can turn into silos if we're not careful. Those are all skills and roles that need to be involved. They don't necessarily all need to be in separate people per se, but they do need to work. And as much as they are in separate people, they do need to work together closely so that they can be efficient. Again, focusing on flow efficiency. Right? If you're having trouble understanding what I'm saying, try to describe, not show somebody else how to tie a shoe. Like take 3 minutes and try writing that down at some point, and it tends to be very difficult. If you have a great description of this, I would love to see it if you want to put it in the chat. Again, the thing is that oftentimes we all agree, or say we all agree, but we have different models in our heads. Okay, the next waste is task switching. So this is actually the one that's usually referred to as motion, but it's this idea of let's make sure that we're all being, again, maximally used, but we're going back and forth between different tasks. This is important, right? We don't want to be switching between tasks a lot. The idea here is that, if we slice, there is a switching cost, and if we focused on task A, then task B, then task C, we'd be done in 3 weeks. Otherwise, it's going to take us 4 weeks because we're switching back and forth. I had a previous boss that once told me that we need to demonstrate progress on multiple fronts. This particular, it took me a while, but I kind of understood what he was getting at, but still, this is what I had in my head. I'm like, well, we could demonstrate progress on multiple fronts, or we could actually get one thing done. And I think that is, again, depending upon your goals, really important. One other way that this kind of manifests is that there's this idea of interrupting developers is bad. Now, one way to get rid of the waste is to get rid of the interruptions or get rid of the switching. Another is to reduce the cost of the switching or reduce the cost of interruptions. And since interruptions will happen, this is even talked about in Dilbert, right? Interruptions will happen. It's just, and whether or not we fight against them, of course we want to try to reduce them, but we also want to reduce the impact of them. Other interruptions that might happen is this idea of the lottery factor, that people might leave your company if they went. How many people would have to leave? How many people on your team would have to win the lottery before you started to lose critical information about your systems, right? So how we can compensate for this, again, not necessarily by reducing. We can do things to reduce the frequency of the interruptions or the switching, but we can also reduce the impact of it through this idea of distributed cognition. And I brought up mob programming before. Again, I would recommend, if you look at this particular case, right, you have a bunch of different kids working on this thing. No one kid is kind of the master architect. Maybe one person that has kind of a vision for where it is, but they're all contributing. Same thing. I brought up this picture before, but again, in a business situation, you have things that, sometimes you have artifacts, right? You have sticky notes, you have this woman's writing something down, you probably have people typing things into computers, but really it's among these people that the cognition is distributed. If somebody walked in and interrupted this meeting, it would possibly interrupt it a little bit, but it wouldn't necessarily derail it completely. This is one of the advantages of things like pair programming or mob programming, is that because you have the cognition distributed between multiple people, when you get interrupted, you have both people on it, and therefore it is much more resilient to interruption. One of the things you can do is strong style pairing. This is the idea that instead of the person that has the idea is at the keyboard, you have the person who's not, the person who is at the keyboard is not the one that has the idea, right? It's this idea that you want, if you have an idea, it has to go through somebody else's hands to get into the computer. Super powerful, and allows you to stay at the level of intent and make sure that both people really understand what's going on, and makes you very much more resilient to interruption or to switching. Okay, the next waste is delays. This one's pretty straightforward. We kind of covered this with the example earlier on, right? That, but the thing is that developers are always making decisions. And if they can't make the decision themselves, and they have to wait for somebody else, then that's going to slow everything down. This is why oftentimes developers will give estimates, but they'll do it based on effort, like how much it'll actually take to get done, as opposed to calendar time or clock time, because they forget that, oh yeah, well, they'll probably have to ask for this, or they'll have to get approval for this. And if we can reduce all of these, right, we can reduce the number of approvals that have to happen, and make sure that, you know, we're being more effective in our you know, our code pipelines and things like that. We're able to reduce the waiting cost. The last waste is defects. So when we're looking at defects, you know, this is kind of obvious, I guess, but all code is going to have defects. Ideally, we don't release defects to production. If we do release defects to production, we fix them quickly. But the thing is that in the lean body of knowledge, right, inspection to prevent defects is absolutely required, right? We want to prevent defects from going out. We don't want to prevent defects from happening in the first place. The thing is that when we're talking about waste here, we're talking about the inspection to find defects, right? So any process we have in place to find defects is waste. That doesn't mean that it's not necessary. There is this idea of necessary waste, but it is something that we do want to reduce. Now, one of the ways that we can do this, right, in terms of finding, putting processes in place that allow us, you know, again, going back to this previous slide, to prevent defects, is to do practices like test-driven development. This allows us to quickly describe what it is that we want to do in code, and then have the code do it, and then make sure that, and then when we have tests in place, we have ensured that it is what we wanted is what happened. And again, I could give a whole talk on, and I have, on test-driven development. So test-driven development is a powerful practice that we can use. Again, not an end in and of itself, but a way to focus on the work and improve how the work is flowing as opposed to on the worker. So these are the 7 wastes: partially done work, extra features, relearning, handoffs, task switching, delays, and defects. So with all of that, right, I said it before, and again, this is one of the catchy things that, you know, again, if you take nothing else away, is stop starting, start finishing. Now, again, in order to finish something, we have to start it. But if we stop starting new things and actually clear out our backlog, our queue of things that we're actually working on, the actual work in process, then we're going to be able to clear things up, reduce a lot of these wastes, and focus on reducing the wastes so that we can start finishing. And again, focus on the work, not on the worker. Making individual workers, individual systems more efficient will lead to efficient islands, not to flow, not to actually getting to a flow efficient lean state. So make sure that the flow units are flowing well. And if you do that by looking for these 7 ways, and you'll be able to more effectively flow value through your system. So thank you, everybody. If you want to contact me, if you want to connect on LinkedIn, please do so. If you connect on LinkedIn, please tell me that you met me here or you saw me present at Nova Code Camp, so I know who you are. So I get a fair number of connection requests from random people, and I'd love to connect with you. You also can check out my blog, which again, I'll have the slides up there within the next week or so. If you want to continue to learn more about these concepts, I recommend the 3 books I have listed here. This is Lean, Lean Software Development, and the Principles of Product Development Flow. I'll put links to those in the Discord channel so that you can take a look at those at your leisure. Additionally, if you're at all interested, I do run a software crafters group here in Atlanta. We're online right now, so you can find us on Meetup. I'm going to be running in December the Software Crafters Unconference, which will be a open space style event focused on software crafting. And then the Global Day of Code Retreat is coming up in November. If you're not familiar with that, I would encourage you to go and check it out. It's a great way to spend a Saturday practicing your craft. So with that, thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, I guess we can maybe take some of that now. Otherwise, I will hang out in Discord if you have questions and want to discuss more. Thank you, everybody.